In a world of 64 squares, Coach Daniel, wise and fair, guiding us with every move, since '84 been in the groove.
From beginners to intermediate minds, his patience, wisdom always shines, teaching tactics, strategy too, every lesson something new. King's Bishop shows the way, in this game we learn and play. Coach Daniel leads the tour, through chess battles evermore.
His voice calm, his knowledge vast, a brighter future from the past. Every checkmate, every draw, thanks to him we stand in awe.
Knights and rooks, they know his fame, pawns and queens respect his name. On the forum, on the board, Coach Daniel all the reward. King's Bishop shows the way, in this game we learn and play. Coach Daniel leads the tour, through chess battles evermore.
Welcome, ladles and jelly spoons, to King's Bishop Teaches Chess. I'm Coach Daniel, your host, also known as King's Bishop, here at chess.com, and we're bringing you a viewer-submitted game analysis for your instructional benefit.
King's Bishop shows the way, in this game we learn and play. Coach Daniel leads the tour, through chess battles evermore.
Welcome, welcome. We have a game to view that was played by Idiot Unknown against the WendyBot, rated 1500. And you saw the position of question here on the title page. We'll talk about that position in particular, but we'll go over the entire game so that we can learn step by step and see how we arrived at that position. So, Idiot Unknown, rated 449, boldly playing a bot over 1,000 rating points higher, begins the game with a queen's pawn opening, pawn to d4. WendyBot replies with d5, and Idiot Unknown chooses Chigorin's variation. Mikhail Chigorin lived from 1850 to 1908. He was a Russian chess player and, in fact, played 2 world championship matches against Steinitz. The first one was at Havana in 1889. He lost that with 6 wins, 10 losses, and 1 draw. The second match was also at Havana, that time in 1892, and it was 8 wins, 10 losses, and 5 draws. Chigorin is considered the last great player of the Romantic chess style, but he also served as a major source of inspiration for the Soviet chess school, which dominated the world of chess in the middle and latter parts of the 20th century. Knight to c3, Chigorin's variation, and WendyBot replies with bishop to f5, and this is Albert's defense, named for the American chess grandmaster Lev Albert, who was born in 1945, August 21st, in fact. His birthday's coming up next month. He was born in Russia. He became a 3-time Ukrainian chess champion, 3 years running, 1972, 73, and 74. He earned the International Master title in 1976 and became a Grandmaster in 1977. He defected to the United States in 1979 and became a 3-time United States chess champion. Those titles came in 84, 85, and 1990. He also won 2 U.S. Opens in 1987 and 1989. Bishop to f5 is Lev Albert's defense. Now, bishop f4 is the move that most beginners love to play. It's not a bad choice, waking up your bishop and getting him out of bed. But the way the masters play this opening, I would imagine with the exception of Ben Feingold, is f3. And that's going to be answered by e6 and e4 and bishop g6 and bishop d3, bishop b4, and king's knight to the e2 square. Not played in this game and really complicated. Ben would advise his students to go ahead and stick with the bishop f4 here, and I don't think it's a bad move either. e6 is played. Now, knight b5, not necessarily a bad move. It's threatening the fork here on c7, which is a super attack. But it's really a one-move wonder because it can be easily defended. So you're better off continuing your development in this position. For example, play pawn e3 to open the door for your other bishop, or bring your knight out. Let your bishop and your knight lead in the fight, and don't move the same guy twice when you still have other pieces in bed. Unless, of course, there's a very, 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 very good reason. Well, knight b5 was played by white here, and the blunder, c6. It does hit the knight, but it ignored the super attack on c7 square, forking the king and the rook. So that pawn can be defended. The easiest way to defend is knight a6, but as you know, the knight on the rim is dim. So even more clever, and I want you to learn this technique because it doesn't defend the pawn immediately, but because it comes with check, you can develop your bishop, and then when white gets out of check by interposing, then bishop a5 defends against the fork, and you don't have to put your knight on the rim and look dim. But he'll have to, because he's blocked off his own squares of escape. So he'll have to come down here. Okay, coming back. For that reason, c6 was a blunder on WendyBot's part, and our viewer played the gorgeous Forkosaurus Rex here to win the rook. King d7 was played. Knight takes the rook. Now knight a6 was played, and pawn e3. And of course, that threatens to capture and double them up here. That would probably be a winning move. So WendyBot dealt with that by playing pawn b5. I thought knight b4 might be worth a try, and you pull the same thing on white that white pulled on you. But b5 was played, and look at the eval bar. Oof, not liked there. Pawn f3 was played. White's clearly winning, but you should really develop your pieces and don't move your pawns. Do not move your pawns in the beginning, except to get your bishops out of bed. Do not move your pawns in the beginning. Get all your other pieces out instead. And rise and shine, wake up your sleepy heads, get your lazy pieces up out of bed. Rise and shine, wake up the sleepy heads, get them into the board. Okay, so yeah, develop your pieces. Knight f3, bishop d3. These would be, in my opinion, better choices than pawn f3. You're winning, so I'm not going to criticize you too much. I'm just telling you in general practice. Here, knight h6. Ooh, the knight on the rim is dim. Not a good choice. Pawn e4 is not the best way to attack this bishop because black has two attackers on that square, and you only have one defender. When he has more attackers than defenders, he can overpower. So the better way to attack that bishop, if you're bent on attacking it, is with pawn to g4. And he'll have to do something about that. He can try running away. He could try a counterattack, but you're sitting pretty in either case. Coming back, e4, though, gives away a pawn for no good reason, and black gladly captures that pawn with his D-man. Pawn takes the pawn, bishop takes the pawn. Now knight to e2 is a fairly natural move, but it's going to allow black to equalize. And I want to teach you Fisher's rule here. Igor Smirnov of Remote Chess Academy espouses Fisher's rule here, and that is when your opponent has pieces in your territory, you should deal with those pieces. So let's put that bishop in danger and chase it away with our queen, or make him do something about this threat with queen e2. Think about this. I want you to imagine ranks 1 through 4 as white's side of the board, or white's house, if you will, and ranks 5 through 8 as black's house. Well, you've got an intruder in your house. They have kicked down your door and are threatening your family members. What would you do if that was the actual case and not simply a metaphor? Well, you would confront the intruder and say, "Get out of my house." Now, he could, in this example, probably defend and insist on maintaining his presence on your doorstep. But the point is, you definitely want to confront that intruder and get your pieces out of bed. Coming back. Knight e2, however, is going to allow black to equalize, and we referenced this before by simply playing knight b4 and attacking that c-man and forking the king and the rook. Well, black did not play that. The super attack is obviously the best, but for some reason, WendyBot played knight f5, missing the chance to equalize. Now knight c3 hits that intruder, and bishop b4 pins the knight to the king so that the knight cannot take the other bishop. a3 attacks the next intruder. That's what I like to see. And e5 is a blunder. It's going to allow, notice this piece relationship. Do not open lines for your opponent's attackers. So this will allow a discovered check. Instead, black could have tried queen h4 check. It's a better try. White could block with an attack on the queen, but then bishop takes knight check, pawn takes bishop, queen f6. And even though white is still better, black is still fighting at least. Coming back, e5 pretty much gives up the game if white exploits this piece relationship and puts his opponent in check. Wow, 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 wow. White did not exploit that piece relationship. Taking this E-man is so much better. Note that that bishop is still going to be there on the next turn because black has to move his king. Well, okay, I say has to. He could block with one of his bishops. If he blocks with this bishop, he's going to eventually lose it anyway. He's moving into a pin. We're not going to take it right away. We're going to take this bishop first and then take that bishop on the next turn with our knight. So taking with the pawn is just a much, much better move than taking the bishop here on b4. Now e takes the bishop on f4. Knight takes the bishop on e4. Knight takes the pawn on b4. A little bit late here. And here white blundered with knight g5, hanging his knight. Yes, it threatens to fork the queen and the rook, but it's an empty threat because the queen can just gobble you up here. Actually, you've got a better move than gobbling him up, to be honest. You can give check here and then gobble this one up because you want to avoid rook takes pawn here because that's check, and it also defends that knight. And it also provides a safe square for that knight. So, knight g5 is a blunder in either case. Just take the pawn with check and you are golden. Instead, he did play knight g5, and WendyBot's eyes, if she has eyes and if she's really a she, went like this and grabbed the knight on g5 with the queen, as just illustrated. Much better is to give check and then take here. The reason we give check is it buys us a move, and then we can pick up the knight and defend against rook takes the A-man. Instead, queen takes knight on g5, and white did not take advantage of this, but rather played d5. So that's a missed opportunity. Rook takes being clearly better, giving check, and buying a move to help extricate the knight. Now, here black played rook takes knight, and that's not actually the best try. You can take that knight eventually, but play queen h4 check first, and after he gets out of check, then play queen f2 check so that a7 is covered again. After king c1, then you can grab that knight with your rook. You could also probably take this pawn with your knight if you so desire, now that this pawn is covered and white can't take it. White does have a little cute move here, though. He can capture the B pawn with his bishop because the C pawn is overworked and the knight is pinned. So we have this idea of perhaps attacking that pinned knight, causing black some havoc. He'd probably have to play queen c5 here to cover everything and chase this guy out of the way, and then go ahead and take the knight. Coming back, taking the knight right away is just not the best bet, and it does allow a discovered check again, and in fact, that's what was played. Pawn takes pawn, double check, king takes the pawn. Now queen f3 check, skewering the king and the rook. Do not play queen e2 here. That's a blunder because now knight d4 hits the queen and defends the b man. So after queen e4 here with check, queen d5, queen takes queen, king takes queen, pawn c4 check, and here king c5. You do not want to play pawn takes pawn here. Remember, do not open lines to your king. So if you play pawn takes pawn, I've got the rook to a5 check, and after king c6, bishop takes the pawn. Although, according to eval bar, black has equalized. So do not play queen e2 here. That's empty and refutable. Queen f3 is the right idea, and king c5 is not the right idea. Much more hopeful is king c7. Even though you're still losing your rook, queen takes, don't forget your pieces are also susceptible to that Forcosaurus Rex, and that can finally be played. And after king f2, queen h4 check, king g1, knight takes rook, queen takes pawn check, forking the king and the knight, king d6, now queen takes a1. But I say king c7's more hopeful because in this line, even though white has an extra rook on the board, it is boxed in by all of his pieces and the king is contained. And so white has to come up with a way to extricate that extra rook. Extricate the extra rook. All right, coming back. So king c5, and now queen takes the rook is a mistake because it still ignores the threat of the fork that I've been talking about. You could have played something like queenside castles here to avoid that. Well, queen takes rook was played, and knight takes c2 was not played. Clearly better try is knight takes c2, and you get pretty much the same position that I just showed a minute ago. After king f2, knight takes rook, queen takes pawn. This time, though, the king is more advanced, but we still have the fork, so actually the king ends up in the same place, doesn't it? If you play queen takes, it's the same position as before, king g1. Don't play king e2 here, or as you can see, a perpetual check and even repetition can be reached. After g takes the pawn, queen c4 check, king f2, queen d4 check, king e1, or wherever. I'm just showing one of many ways to get the perpetual check. If white tries to find a refuge over here, he will fail. Queen b3 check can be played, king c1. Queen e3 check can be played, king b1. And trying to take refuge behind this pawn isn't going to work because now queen e1 check, and you cannot play king c2 because you lose your queen. So you'd have to play king a2, and then, of course, we've got check up here. And there's simply no way to avoid the checks. You obviously can't play here, not because you lose your queen, but because you lose the game. That's a self-mate. So you'd have to just go back and forth, and a repetition will be the result, and that's a draw. Coming back. That's if queen takes. Knight takes c2 was clearly the better try. WendyBot with queen h4 check. Pawn g3. Queen e7 check. Bishop e2. There's no sense allowing this fork that we've been talking about all day. Just move your king out of check and defend the pawn. Instead, bishop e2 was played, and knight takes c2 was not played. Instead, he played knight d4, or she, I should say, if bots in fact have gender. She's identifying as a Wendy, which one assumes is a girl. I'm not good on this political correctness, guys. So, right, again, you get a lot of the same here. Knight takes pawn, check, king f1, knight takes rook, and white will win this knight this time. Instead of coming here and winning this knight, let's come here and fork the king and this knight. Because this knight's in the corner, not looking too good. All right, let's go back. So knight d4, not the best choice. Here, finally, castling, although he can take this with check, but this is still a great move. Yeah, he does take it, or she, sorry. Takes it with check, king b1, and rook d8 is begging to be played here. F takes g3, queen c8 check, knight c6 blocks, rook d e1. Yeah, that's a nice pin on this knight, but remember, when the pawn crosses into your house, it becomes a 2-point pawn, then a 4-point pawn. It's threatening to become a 6-point pawn, and then a 9-point pawn, also known as a queen. So better to take this pawn, and we don't care if he takes our pawn. We will then attack the queen with that rook. Instead, rook d e1, pinning the knight, but allowing g2. And I believe this was the position submitted. It is. And we'll come back to this position because we're going to play it. I'm going to play it against the maximum level bot from this position in a moment. b4 was played, and that loses immediately. You don't want, this is a blanket and a shield for your king. Look how these two pawns together create a barrier behind which your king can hide. By playing this move, check, you're thinking, okay, he'll take with his king and then I'll take his knight. But that's bad thinking because he's not forced to take with the king. He can play king b6, which he did play, and now your king is exposed without a shield. So you have to deal with this threat and keep your king safe. So rook hg1 was in order. By the way, that's not a hot square because the knight is pinned to the queen. So just play this and you're safe and sound and win the game from there. All right, b4 is going to lose pretty much immediately because now there's no way to make your rook safe. King b6, and I say there's no way to make the rook safe because this is a self-mate. The only way to keep in the game is to let him have your rook, and you could see even if you do that, you're obviously still losing. So rook g1 comes way too late, and it is a self-mate because black plays queen takes b4 check, king a2, knight c3 check, king a1, and queen a3 checkmate. Let's go back to the critical blunder. So instead of b4, we're going to play it from here against the bot, practice versus computer. And we are going to play our rook to the g1 square. I'm tempted to super attack this pawn. The problem is he can capture this rook with a hit on our queen. So instead, let's put our queen here and give check. Take the g7 pawn, super attacking the g2 pawn. We have to defend against queen takes c2, so capture here. And now trade queens, or try to trade queens. He did not accept that trade, and that's no surprise. So let's move our rook to safety. We have to keep an eye on c1. Now here we can actually force a queen trade. Notice the peace relationship between the king and the queen. So we pin the queen to its king, and whether they play queen takes queen or queen c5, we will trade queens. Now let's just remove the defender of the f-man. Grab the f-man. The rest should be relatively easy. Fork the two weak pawns. Grab the a-man. Improve our king. All right, we need to get our rook in a better place. Do not attack the pawn and get forked. Let's pin that knight and attack the pawn this way. Right, I suppose he can defend the pawn, can't he? Instead, he went, yeah, maybe I should have played the king there. Let's push that b-man out of danger. Right, just move forward here. Well, I can create a passed pawn. Don't like the idea of leaving this pawn vulnerable, but he'd have to find a way to get his knight safely to one of these squares before he could exploit that. So I'm sure I'm okay to play pawn c4. He moved his pawn to the defense of his knight. Right, that makes sense. That's another option that he can try. Of course, if he ever moves his knight, he loses his pawn. So let's push the king back. Let's come after his b-man. Oh, that defends the pawn. Yeah, that's okay. We could play to b5. His knight can't defend everything. So he goes back to defend this one. So I will now take the b-man, and I will now push my queenside pawns. Okay, thank you for that. And from here, it should be pretty easy. Check, advance the pawn. He cannot stop everything, ladles and jelly spoons. Oh, so he's coming here. Let's prevent that. Well, let's push the other pawn. All right, here we're just going to give up our rook for his knight because his king cannot stop our pawns. In fact, even if we didn't have this one, this is still winning. In fact, I'll win it without this pawn. I could easily push this up for promotion, but let me just illustrate. I can ignore any threat against this pawn because in order to take this pawn, he'd have to let that pawn go. So let's push the b-man, and note he's covering b8, but now we can push the c-man even though it's undefended. King cannot take without allowing b8. So his better choice in my mind was to try to blockade. That's not going to work either way, but now we can promote, and now we've got him. Let's just contain him, dance with the king, dance with the king, dance with the king, dance with the king, and then bring in the helper for checkmate. Oh yeah. Thanks for the submission, Idiot Unknown. I hope this was a help to you. Have a great day and play some great chess. Bye now.